Today we're going to talk about the end of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, which still has a major impact on French nationalism today. So, following the Reign of Terror, France had an extremely unstable government. Lots of people still saying they wanted to uphold the ideals of the revolution, but also lots of fracturing into smaller groups and lots of individuals trying to jockey for power. Eventually, the person who uh, ended up taking control over all of it was Napoleon Bonaparte. So, Bonaparte was a Corsican general. Corsica is not part of mainland France, it's actually one of the two large islands right beside Italy. And Bonaparte actually grew up speaking Italian, not French, which shows you how the idea of French nationalism changed during the French Revolution as well, because one of the unifying factors we talk about in nationalism was language, except Corsica was an Italian-speaking part of France. But through the revolution and through the things that Napoleon is about to do, that's not going to matter so much in the face of the civic nationhood that would develop in France. Uh, Bonaparte is infamous for being extremely charismatic as well as a brilliant general. He managed to outwit both his enemies and his allies during this period of instability. There were actually the people in power saw this guy, saw how much control he had over the army and his political and military brilliance, and they're like, this guy's going to try and seize power, which they were absolutely right about. So they actually at one point tried to send him off to Egypt to get him out of the way, while at the same time trying to deal with Britain once again attempting to invade and overthrow the revolution. He managed to outlast everyone, though. When he finally got into power, his allies thought, oh, yeah, we'll totally dominate this jarhead politically, and he outwitted them and got himself installed as the supreme head of the entire government. So that was in 1799. So we're now a decade on from when the revolution began. Um, and Napoleon said that he was doing all of this to defend the revolution's ideals. And some of them he did, but he also made the state much more centralized. We had gone from having centralized power in the hands of the king to it becoming something more equitable and democratic, and then with Napoleon's rise to power, things got sucked back in. He became more authoritarian and centralized with his power. He also reversed some of the gains made by the revolution. Not certainly some things that needed to change, that needed fixing, but also some things that would not come around again for nearly a century in or two. In particular, women lost a lot of their rights that they had gained during the revolution. They had made progress towards um, gender equality. It still wasn't equality as we would see it today, but it was progress towards that. But Napoleon stripped it away, made the state much more patriarchal, and put women back into a subservient role. On the other hand, he also overhauled the education and legal codes, and it's changed, but the fundamental foundation of both education and law in France and Quebec to this day is based off of the Napoleonic Code. So some of the changes that Napoleon made weren't great, but some of them have also stuck around for a long time and very much become part of the French identity and of French nationalism. In 1804, so 5 years later, Napoleon actually declared himself emperor. And I'm can't remember if the story is anachronistic or not, if it actually happened, but there are certainly stories of a person was going to put the crown on Napoleon's head, and he's like, "No, I'm the only one who gets to crown myself," and he put it on his own head because that's who he saw as having all of the authority. Him. There was no higher authority in France uh, during the Empire than Napoleon himself. And Napoleon certainly wanted to conquer all of Europe and rearrange it as he had done for France. Uh, Napoleon probably didn't see himself as I'm taking away autonomy from all of these people. He saw himself as I see what needs to be done. I'm going to go out and fix it. And people might not want me to, but I'm going to do it anyhow because that's how much power I have. And he continued to be to have military victory after military victory. The map here, flagrantly taken from Wikipedia, is of the French Empire at its greatest extent, and it is much bigger than modern day France. He managed to conquer a huge amount of territory in Spain, in modern day France, in Germany, Italy, Austria, Switzerland, but famously, infamously, it all fell apart after he tried to invade Russia. And there's still debate about whether it was bad luck, bad planning, if it was Russia that beat him, or if it was winter that beat him. But he tried to invade Russia. It didn't go as well as he planned. Winter set in earlier and harsher than he expected, and after that, Napoleon's armies and forces just had to keep retreating back towards France. And Britain and their coalition with Russia and other European countries were able to turn the tide against him and eventually take down Napoleon in 1814. But the legacy of Napoleon and what he did for France would remain. It would certainly influence French history going onwards, but it also influences French politics and the structure of the entire government. A lot of it was still laid down to Napoleon by Napoleon, even today. That is one of those unifying factors that changed France from a country ruled by a king to the nation of France that has existed ever since the French Revolution.